You're listening to Trek FM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.
Hey everyone, I'm Rod Roddenberry, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Are you taking all these books? I thought I'd take some light reading, in case I got bored.
Welcome to TFM's Books and Comic Show. I am just one of the hosts here, Matthew Rushing, and with me, as he is pretty much every single time we get together these days, it is the one and only Christopher Jones. How are you doing, Chris?
Well, Matthew, I'm wishing that I weren't the one and only Christopher Jones, because I could use a few clones of myself right now to get through the magazine deadlines before the holidays, record podcasts, and do all that stuff.
So you're saying you need a little Michael Keaton's multiplicity happening.
Yeah, I think that would be good. However, there's no way I'm putting the seventh clone on editing duty, because he's just going to, every other word's going to be pizza, pizza, pizza.
Well, I can understand that. As we record, I'm thinking to myself, man, I could use some pizza right now. So, oh goodness. Well, we're excited to be back. This week, Chris, you're going to be interviewing Una McCormack about her brand new book, The Autobiography of Admiral Kathryn Janeway. That's right, she got the promotion, and so I'm really excited to hear that one because of our time zones. I won't be a part of the interview with trying to coordinate Tokyo and the Pacific Northwest as well as London. Doesn't really work out so well. So
yeah, well, she's in Cambridge, but yeah, it's a very, very difficult task to coordinate that. I think we probably only managed to do it once, haven't we? We had her on the Orb a long time ago to talk about Garrick.
Yeah, it's definitely always been difficult to make that happen, because of the way time zones work. I feel like, what we really need to do is to go in some sort of orb trance together and record there, and that would probably have really helped us out. But before we get into our news section, of course, just want to remind you, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts, and just make sure that you're subscribed so you get Literary Treks as soon as it drops. If you happen to hit us up on Apple Podcasts or iTunes, we will read your review out on the show. So, Chris, we have a couple of things we wanted to talk about this week, and basically it is we want to review the first two issues of the Voyager comics that have just started coming out. It's called Seven's Reckoning. And so really interesting that, of course, we have a Voyager-laden show this week. So it's all Voyager all the time here on Literary Treks this week. And what I thought was really interesting about this comic is that we learned right there from the first issue that this takes place not too long after Seven has joined the crew. And most importantly, and who cares about that, Kathryn Janeway got a haircut, and so that's really, I think, the most important thing throughout the two issues that I found.
I love that opening, and I haven't watched Voyager carefully straight through in a long time, and I was thinking after I read this that I need to go back and check the episodes around this time to see when her hair changed, because I suspect that the writer Dave Baker and the artist Angel Hernandez probably did check that, and it probably does fit in pretty well. But I love the fact that we open this comic with Tuvok making comments about Janeway's haircut. And I thought that it felt exactly like the kind of little opening that we would get on a TV episode leading into something more serious. And right from the start, I felt like Dave did a really good job here of capturing the voices of the characters throughout the whole story.
I do agree with you. I think that this really did feel like a Voyager episode. And what was most interesting was, the whole thing becomes about this storyline of Voyager running across a derelict ship that is just massive, and it turns out that it is a generational ship that these people are trying to actually get back home, much in the same way that Voyager is. They've gotten lost in the Delta Quadrant, and they have been traveling for almost 1,000 years trying to get home, and it turns out that their warp core has gone kaput. Obviously, this being a generational ship, you also have people in cryostasis that they're trying to keep alive with all of this. And what was interesting to me is how immediately, this stuck out, because this has been seen a couple of times actually in the literature and books by, I think, actually Dayton Ward. We kind of run into massive derelict ships. So I was immediately thinking, I wonder if the author here of the comics had read some of those books as well, because it's very similar. But people don't stay asleep when you get onto these ships, of course. And I thought that the most interesting thing here, this is called Seven's Reckoning, but she didn't seem to have as big a role as I thought she was going to have, in the sense of, like, what's really going on in this story is it's this race that we run into, and the way in which they have a kind of a caste society. It reminded me of things like all the way from Spartacus to any type of caste society we run into here in our world, even now or in the past, and watching that play out with how they view life was actually the most fascinating thing about the comic to me.
Yeah, I think Seven will have a bigger role in the final two parts than she did here, because this is very much the setup, and you do see towards the end of the second comic how she's becoming more and more involved. But it's an interesting point about the fact that the generational ship concept has been used in the literature. I think here, though, it really supports the core of the story, which is about how stories play out over time in the first place. And to really show that, I think you need to set up a long time frame, which is where we get the almost a millennium that they've been traveling here, and then their history goes back further. And so in that situation, I think it's a good setting for the story that Dave wants to tell. The whole concept of the aliens are quite interesting, and it reminded me of some other things that we've seen recently in Star Trek, as recently as on Discovery with the Kelpians and the Ba'ul, where you had one race that was dominant and then it got flipped around. But I'm curious to see more about how that plays out in the next two parts.
Yeah, I mean, and one of the things that's really fascinating about this race is the fact that they are beholden to this idea of story. And what was really interesting to me was to see how, Battlestar Galactica has that phrase.
Yeah.
It's happened before and it will happen again.
Yeah.
And that's basically exactly what these aliens believe too. This idea of we have these recurring stories and they continually play out over the generations and over the thousands of years. And yet at the same time, there's also this underlying thing almost of that, each of the casts have their own story. And so it becomes kind of about, like who writes the history.
Yeah.
And it is about how you see it. But also there's an interesting bit of relativism in there as well, is that we all have quote unquote our own story, our own truth. And like, then it becomes hard of trying to figure out in Seven's position, who do you trust? And she seems to have very much, by the end of the second issue, picked a side and decided which one she is willing to throw her support behind, which I thought was really interesting as well. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that are happening, I think, just thematically in this comic, which are really interesting to me because the setup has been good. It's a 4-issue series. So the first 2 issues are kind of the setup, and the last 2 issues will be the payoff. And so it really comes down to me here with these 2 issues. Like, they're good, but the payoff needs to be excellent. You don't want it to kind of fall off in any way. So I can't honestly wait to see where this is going to go, because a lot of times when reading these books, I can kind of predict where things are going to go. And I'm not quite sure exactly how this is going to play out because there are a lot of different options you could take, I think.
Yeah, I feel the same. Yeah, it is an interesting point that each side has their own story, and by injecting Seven into the situation, especially Seven compared with one of the other crew members, you get this third-person objective view from the start because she's so, especially at this point, she's only been aboard Voyager for a short time in the time period where this comic is set. So she's still very much Borg in the way that she thinks. She's still very analytical. There's a whole series throughout, especially the first comic, of her and Tuvok being paired together, and you see how similar they are.
Right.
And what is it? Samantha Wildman is with them, and she says, like, boy, you two are peas in a pod, and they don't get the joke. But Wildman's watching them like, wow, Vulcans and Borg drones, you guys are so similar to each other in how you analyze things. But it is a great way to look at how stories play out over time by having kind of a cold third-person view going into that. But as you say, she does very much come down on one side, and I do find it interesting that she comes down on that side in the way that she does, where she's concerned about the group that's being oppressed and abused, given that she has just herself come from a situation where she was part of a group and she really didn't have her own free will. Do you have any thoughts on why, as a recently detached Borg drone, she might so quickly identify with the group as she does?
It makes me, I mean, it struck me as kind of odd too, because, she does come from this, she comes from the idea of the Borg, and the fact that, they all work as one and there is no hierarchy other than the Queen, which is the one who facilitates the ability for all the Borg to fulfill their roles perfectly, and they're all supposed to just work in sync with one another. And so it is really weird to me that, she would choose this side, and it seems to be a quick identification then for her around the idea of more like personal freedom and being able to choose one's own destiny. At least that's kind of the way it seems with these comics, because this group has been kept down by the group in charge, the ruling class, basically. And they've been kept down for a very specific reason, is that they secrete a pheromone which keeps this ruling class alive much longer than they would if they weren't around. And so in some ways, it's like space health insurance for them. And so they want these people to be under their control, basically, and to not be living their quote-unquote own lives, because they need them for the longevity of their race, which is a really fascinating idea that they would be in that position. And so, again, it does seem a little bit strange that Seven is immediately choosing one side over the other. I don't actually quite know why that's the case, but I do feel like the most interesting part about this is that we are going to find out when the comic is named Seven's Reckoning. So really, I feel like they're telling us this is going to be about her making that choice. This is about the reckoning of her choosing to be more of an individual than basically a drone.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of fascinating to me if that's what this comic is going for. And I think I'm ready for that to happen now. I'm ready for us to see how that plays out.
Yeah, the bit about the pheromone was really interesting because it's just kind of thrown in there. It almost feels like, it's a justification in the story, but it feels almost like a throwaway line because you don't really return to it. But if you think about this in terms of the idea that a story stretches over time, because the whole core of this story is the fact that their ship itself is a story, they say. Everything about their existence is this story. The pheromone perpetuates the story. They're actually keeping alive their own problem in a way. Right. And that's kind of an interesting way to express the idea of what supports, what propels a story, even in history, what propels history and keeps civilization going, and what keeps, two sides going back and forth. They literally, by being in the presence of the other side, live longer than they normally would. So it's an interesting concept. Yeah.
So, I mean, I think to me, the thing that I'm really interested in is to see where this goes. I think they've set up a very good beginning. They've got a great foundation now for this series, and so hopefully, it'll finish off really well. That's all you can hope when you're reading a story. So I'm excited, though. I think this is going to be a lot of fun, and I'm excited for what we got coming up next year. As we talked about last episode, we've got some great things around the corner here. In fact, in 2021, first book out of the gate is the new Picard book, but it's going to be focusing on the Titan, which I'm very, very excited about. So we've got great stuff coming up, and I can't wait to get there, Chris.
Yeah, looking forward to it. So we will see what happens to Seven in the final two parts of this comic, and we'll talk about those later on when they come out later in the new year. And I guess now it's time to hop on with Una and talk about the autobiography of Kathryn Janeway. Well, it's my great pleasure to be joined today by Una McCormack to talk about her new book, The Autobiography of Kathryn Janeway. Una, it's wonderful to see you face-to-face for the first time in a long time.
It's really good to see you. Really nice to be back as well. Thank you.
It's great. We chat on Twitter, but it's been a while since we've been on the podcast together. We always have a complicated time arrangement to work out when you're on the show, with me being in Tokyo and then Matthew being over there in the Pacific and then you being there in England. So today it's just going to be you and me talking about this book.
It's about as tricky a time setup as we could manage, actually, isn't it? I think.
I think so. Yeah. It's one I've dealt with a lot in recent years in my work, because I edit a magazine about British culture and also one about the US and business, and I often have to deal with London and, say, San Francisco and New York and Tokyo at the same time. But that's not recording, so it's a little bit easier. Well, the first thing I want to ask you is about the origin of the project, because we've had the autobiographies of Kirk and Picard, which were written by David Goodman, and now finally we have Janeway's autobiography. And I was curious how you were chosen to be, shall we say, the ghostwriter for Kathryn here.
Yeah, I mean, it does feel like I was her ghostwriter, actually. It really does feel like that, she and I sat down with I was kind of invited over to her office and sat there and we had a giggle over interviews and things. Well, I think those two autobiographies have been successful, and Titan were pleased with them. The Voyager anniversary was coming up, so it was natural to want to do Janeway. And I think very rightly as well, they said, well, we'd like a woman to write this one. Who is a woman who writes Star Trek? And there are two of us, basically, that write Star Trek books. But Kirsten Byer's very busy.
Yeah, exactly.
But they kind of came down the list rapidly and reached me, which I was delighted about. So I think they wanted a woman Star Trek writer, and I was on the spot. So that's good. As naturally as well, Kirsten obviously knows is much more expert in Voyager than I am. She's written the Voyager relaunch pretty much, but it came to me and I said, yeah, that would be fantastic, because although Voyager isn't, obviously it's not my Star Trek, which is very much Deep Space Nine. I've watched it and I knew it and I dipped in. So I thought it's time to go back. And I love Kate Mulgrew. I think she's marvelous. I'd seen her at conventions and things. I thought this will be really good fun. So let's go back and do this all fresh and see where it takes us.
Well, of course, it makes sense that they would want a woman to write it, but I think you sell yourself a little bit short saying that it was either you or Kirsten, because, I think you're the perfect person to write this book because, I've watched you since your daughter was born and I've watched your daughter grow. I follow your comments, your posts about her. And as a mother, I think that makes you perfect to write the story of Janeway because Janeway is very much a nurturing soul and a mother to the crew. And what I found interesting about this autobiography was learning more about her childhood and how her mother and her father and her parents, grandparents and all nurtured her. And I think that's a lot of what I want to talk about today, actually. And I think you were the perfect person to write that.
It was very refreshing to write. The sort of the setup I imagined for her was quite was very nurturing. As you say, it's a tight family unit of her mother, a father, a sister, but embedded in a sort of wider family network of her mother's family. They're sort of on the spot in a rural area of the States, and then close connections to the other side of the family as well. And it was, I think, a lot of characters that I usually write are people like Garrick, who perhaps that family relationship not so friendly and comfortable and nurturing. And it's interesting to write a character like that, a character who's got a strong, I mean, you know, she doesn't get on with her sister. They rub each other up the wrong way. She feels a sort of distance to her mother because the sister's obviously the mother's favorite and she's the father's favorite. So there's all the usual kinds of strains that exist in any family. But there was also a lot of love and nurturing. And it's interesting to write a character like that doesn't have the sort of usual mummy or daddy issues, that sort of thing. Tilly, in the book I wrote about her, has very sort of tense relationship with a very powerful mother trying to come out of her shadow, and a divorce in her childhood that she's not come to terms with. But I thought it'd be really interesting not to have this with Janeway, to have a very, very different setup, because she always strikes me, when you see her on screen, she's a very centered, very certain, very focused, very strong person. She looks like the kind of person who's been given unconditional love at the right age, yeah? And that carries through. And she's in this terrible situation, and, you know, it's frightening, and she feels isolated. But there's this sort of core of strength, and to explore where that might have come from is very, very interesting, I think. So that's the kind of family setup I imagined. We did struggle going, oh, is there enough drama in this sort of setup? But the drama lends itself naturally, I think.
Yeah, there's the conflict between her and her sister, which is natural when you have siblings, especially at those ages. I liked her reaction to finding out she was going to have a little sister. And then the way you described their interactions with each other within the family unit, I thought felt very natural. So it is that kind of natural drama that comes out of a family, instead of feeling like it's something manufactured for the story just to kind of enhance the character.
And then the big blow, I suppose, because she's had this not idyllic, but very solid and strong and supportive environment. The big shock is that her father dies. He's killed. And that's my observation has been that if people have had quite not straightforward, but have had a pretty solid, if they've had a good run of things, then if a disaster strikes relatively late, so she's in her early 20s, isn't she? Mm-hmm. It's even more devastating, because it's not like you've had small, I mean, you wouldn't wish kind of disasters on a child, but it can be more devastating because you've not had to deal with, say, the death of a grandparent, or she's dealt with the death of a dog, which is that is a big shock for a child. But her father dying relatively young and in his prime is a massive blow to her, and sort of throws her into a period of depression. So that, I think, is the big blow, and it comes at a point where she's almost knocked off course by it. So that, I think, was the moment of real drama for her. Which way would she go? Could she pick herself up from this, or was it going to always knock her off course? And this being Janeway, of course, she digs deep, and she finds herself again.
Yeah, and that's something that connected with me as well, because my father died. He actually committed suicide when I was about 39, or I think I was about 39 when it happened. And it was hard because he was someone who I talked to regularly. He was really the only person, because I don't have a lot of family, he was really the only person that I could turn to and talk about problems. And I had talked to him the week before, and we talked for, like an hour or more. As usual, everything seemed fine. And then, the next week, I got a phone call around lunchtime from my aunt, his sister, telling me that they had found him, and it took me years to get over that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's really hard. I'm sorry about that. That's very, very difficult. My father died when I was very young. I was about 12, so and that's a different sort of blow, I think. But I think for many people, it's that first big shock in their life. I think because for all of us, perhaps it's our first sense, not just the loss of someone very dear, but the loss of a kind of anchor, the loss of. I think it removes a barrier between you and your own mortality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
we never want to lose. It's an inevitable part of life, and it's always going to be painful. There are ways in which it can be more or less painful, I think. So that was how I tried to play this one.
Well, he played a very huge role in her life, as readers will find out as they read this autobiography. How did you go about fleshing out that aspect of her story and that relationship that she had with her father?
Well, this was an interesting experience because, of course, there's already a book out there by Jerry Taylor. And we looked very closely at that, and we thought, how closely should we feel bound by this? Because obviously she was a co-creator on the show. So, it's a very strong case for it to say, this is intended to be the story. And I think we sort of looked at the book, and it comes out part way through the show being transmitted. So I think eventually the show sort of drifts from what's established in that. And I think we kind of looked at it and thought, well, if we stick too closely with this, we're not going to have a book. There's nothing really to, we would be caught in a bind here. So let's do with Janeway what's been done with many, many other Trek characters. How many times we had sort of Kirk's origin story, or even Picard's origin story now, Spock's. So let's just take what we have on screen and craft a story around that. So this isn't Jerry Taylor's Janeway. This is Una McCormack's Janeway. But I like to think that it's true to what we see presented on screen from what the writers give us, obviously from the performances, particularly Kate Mulgrew's. So we tried to put that out of our mind. I think if something made it from the book on screen, then we went, that obviously is established. And there were little bits and pieces. I think the sort of direction from the editors and the studio was, if there's something you like, I think I've taken some names or maybe a couple of situations, work with that. But what I really wanted to do was center, and I try and do this in many of my books, center many of her female friends, the women who have impact on her life. So her mother, her father, obviously, because he's so significant he's her buddy and her mate, as well as her kind of first mentor. But give her mentors at Starfleet Academy, give her a circle of friends, show who her sister marries and the family life the sister has, investigate all those other things. And you kind of, once you start imagining those networks and building them up, then you get a much stronger sense of the space that this individual person inhabits. So that was how we tried to juggle that, inspired by that, but not beholden to it. And then it's just a case of it's making stuff up. How would she react? And it's funny, I watched Voyager. I had a really quite intense, I watched it all in about 7 weeks, I think. It was kind of propped up on the sofa going, episode 6 today, it is very watchable. And there's lots and lots of little bits and pieces. She has lots of throwaway lines about, an oak tree that she swung on, or a dish that her grandmother made. And these are sort of nuggets of gold, because you have to take these little jewels and sort of connect them up with a chain and make sure that the whole piece of jewelry, to kind of run with that metaphor, kind of connects up and you've got something coherent from it. So there were lots of little tidbits that we could, and obviously we hope that a fan will kind of go, oh, I remember that from X, I remember that from Y, and be pleased that they've recognised it and that we've paid attention to it. So yeah, just spending time with her and listening to the voice and picturing what that life would be like.
And also, you heard it here, everyone. Writers make stuff up.
It's amazing, isn't it?
It's amazing.
We just literally, you're sitting there going, I've got to do 1,500 words today. I'd better make something up. That really is what it comes down to.
Yeah. But those little nuggets you talk about, I think they stand out to you more when you do a very rapid rewatch like that as well, because you're not, at least for me, I've watched Enterprise this way twice, where like very fast going through, and I've done DS9 this way. I did Voyager this way recently, but not as rapidly as the others. And I know how those things pop out to you because you're a little bit less focused on the story itself because you already know the story very well. And so those lines pop out. Speaking of fathers, though, so Janeway has this wonderful relationship with her father. He's often gone because of the nature of Starfleet, and he's a captain, and he's gone for a long time. But when they're together, they have this very strong bond. At one point in the autobiography, we see that moment where she meets Tom Paris for the first time, and he's 12 years old because she served under his father. And it's mentioned that it seems like Tom is trying to get his dad's attention. So there's this contrast between Janeway, who had this father who was very loving and devoted to her and had this strong connection, and Tom, who was always kind of fighting to get that acknowledgement from his father. And that contrast just stood out to me there. Is there anything else that you can add about how fathers play those roles in people's lives and how we become who we are because of that?
It's a very Trek story to sort of, and I think it's a very American story to kind of tell the story of disappointment and miscommunication between father and son, and it's there on screen between Tom and Owen. Mm-hmm. It's easier perhaps within that sort of milieu for a father and daughter to relate. In the same way that it's tricky for mothers and daughters because you're sort of it's like you're trying to break free of identifying with that one, whereas the other one, there's sufficient difference that you can be more compatible.
I have a son and a daughter, so I've seen firsthand how that dynamic works. Yeah.
Yes, it does. It really, really does. But I also thought that the key difference is that Janeway really wants to be in Starfleet. Yeah, Kathryn wants to be in Starfleet, and basically, I don't think Tom does. And you see this play out. I mean, who's the best father in Star Trek? It's obviously Ben Sisko, and you see this dynamic play out where Jake eventually comes up to him and says, I don't want to be in Starfleet. And Ben goes, oh, cool. Right. Okay. Oh, I thought you did. Well, I'm glad you tell me. What do you want to do then? And it's like, oh, Ben, could you?
Let's go build a ship and write a book and
go and do brilliant
make some
stuff.
Gumbo.
Exactly that. Exactly. Find out what you want to do. And you sort of imagine if only Tom had been able to have this conversation with Owen, but for whatever reason, he can't. And at the same time, you've got a very busy man with a very busy job. And he's sort of going, Tom's sort of going, hello, I'm here. And how do I get your attention? Well, I get it by joining Starfleet. But of course, I'm going to wash out of that because I've got problems with authority because I've got unresolved father issues. So the way I end up getting your attention is by getting thrown into jail. So I really wanted to, it was really striking watching back the show to see Tom sort of turn from this sullen, quite beaten down man into somebody who freed of that, of the sort of mess of that relationship that neither of them can quite see a way out of, sort of frees himself. And you see it in Owen's face when they finally see each other again. Mm-hmm. He's just relieved he's alive. And I think it's as much, the way I wanted to play this story was it's as much Owen growing up as a father as it is Tom growing up as a son. And can we do spoilers for the book? Let's just assume that.
Yeah, let's do. Let's just give everyone a spoiler alert. I mean, we already spoiled it for everyone that Janeway's dad dies, but beyond that, make sure read the book if you don't want to have any spoilers.
Yeah, we'll be spoilerific from here, I think.
Okay.
So in that last chapter where we sort of wrap up and see where everyone's gone, it absolutely seemed true to me that it would be B'Elanna that would have the Starfleet career. And Tom would go and be a house husband. It just basically seemed to be what he wanted to do, kind of knock around, build cars, do a bit of cooking. I'd give him a kind of secondary career as a writer of holodramas. So, he's the old mind is ticking over. But he struck me as someone who, he's got a lot of personal courage. He doesn't mind taking risks. He's learned all this at Starfleet, I think. But basically, he's happy just providing the setup in which B'Elanna can fly. And I think that's very true to Voyager as well, which, so much when Voyager was being made was about casting a woman as the captain, Mm-hmm. Is this even a thing? And coming down on set every day to see how she's doing in the performance. So to give it a chance to explicitly reverse those roles within a quite nuclear family setup, I thought was playful and fun. So I hope people enjoy it.
Yeah, definitely.
Good.
Let's roll back just a little bit back to the beginning, because another thing I wanted to ask you about is there are these moments in the autobiography where Janeway is talking about her relationship within the family and the stories that she's told. Sometimes they're literal stories, like the Cherokee story of the water spider. There's Alice in Wonderland. And then there are just other interactions that she has with family members. And I was wondering about your thought process about how you come up with the stories that would be influential to a young girl, and how much of that is based on your own experiences as a child, your relationship with your mother, and how much of it stems from your role now as a mother to your daughter.
Oh, that's interesting. I think that so my daughter and I hilariously have got this thing, just this sort of thing we were talking about, which is that she absolutely will not read books. Yeah, okay. Books, absolutely not. They are completely identified with the mother units. Therefore, they must be rejected in all ways, except the vast amount of books that she reads with her dad.
Okay.
And kind of sneakily reads when I'm not looking. So books, no, they are there. The mother reads books. The mother produces books. Books must be denied, except for the books I'm reading, So that quite comically is sort of going on. But and there are lots of books around. You can't sort of see it. There's a lot of books around this flat. So it's not like there's a shortage of material. I think whenever I'm writing a novel, I always have a story at the back of my mind, which is kind of the touchstone story. So if I get stuck when I'm writing, I try to think, what basically is this book about? For this one, it was Wizard of Oz. It's as simple as that. There's no place like home. She's Dorothy Gale. The Twister has taken her off. But what was nice about that is that it also located Janeway as somebody from the Midwest. And that gave me a kind of sense of the place that she was from, the physical, geographical place that she was from, and tried to write her as a Midwesterner. But not a Midwesterner now. We're talking about somebody in the far future. So there's a section where I kind of talk about her childhood reading. And I thought quite hard about this because, there's a kind of established canon that maybe you're given as kids. There's British kids, mine would be slightly different. So I talked to American friends and I said, well, what books did you always get given? And how would you wish that was, how would we think that might be different? So, for example, I don't have the Little House books on, Little House on the Prairie, because they're really, really, really problematic about American Indians, about Native Americans. They're really awful. And I would really hesitate about giving those to a child. I would read them, but I would always contextualize them. But I read them completely without context, which is really worrying now. So I tried to think, what would a juster and more representative canon look like? So instead of seeing the usual suspects, I kind of try to put on some literature that's contemporary from now that would be more representative, and also imagine books that maybe are written 100 years from now or 150 years from now. So there's a little sort of canon that I give her, which is perhaps a bit different from usual. And some people have liked this and some people have not, thought it's too woke or too right on, whatever. But I think these stories do form us. They feed into our imagination. They give us stock characters and ways of relating to the world. And the stories that she likes are naturally very outward focused. They're perhaps about adventure and exploration and the new and excitement. And her sister likes slightly other things. And at the same time, her mother is writing children's stories. So,
Right.
So maybe she leans a bit more to, it's very funny. My little girl's been learning about Amelia Earhart this week. So we stuck the Voyager episode on. Yeah. Last week at school, she was doing Amelia Earhart. So we put the Voyager episode on for, right, you've got to have the real story.
This is what really happened.
This is what really happened. Yeah. So all of this, it's just really interesting to think about the stories that we feed kids, how we fill their imaginations. What are the things that we stock their minds with at a very early age? So I did a little bit of thinking about that.
I have it in my notes. There's a line in the book that says, people often ask me what it was like having a writer of children's books as a mother. And I put a note in about you. I was thinking that I'm V, your daughter. People often ask me what it was like having a writer of Star Trek and Doctor Who books as a mother.
Well, I can tell you what that's like. She's absolutely disappointed in me that I've never written a Star Wars book. So,
oh, okay.
Star Wars, it's all Star. She's naturally honed in on the one property in which I have no social capital at all.
It's interesting because when I was her age, I was all in on Star Wars as well. Star Wars came out. I was about 5 when it was first released, and so I was all I got into Star Trek around the same age, but Star Wars was my thing until university or late high school.
I was about the same age. I was 6. I just turned 6 when Star Wars came out in the UK, 1978, January 1978, and I absolutely loved it. But there came a point as a girl viewer where you kind of bounced off, and that's not. It's actually really joyful. She sort of plunged into this canon, and there's no question that there's space for her in this narrative now. We came in. I mean, Leia obviously is her big obsession because Leia is awesome. But people like Ahsoka Tano, she's just absolutely hooked onto. There's no question that there's space for a little girl in this narrative now. It's perfect. So I'm just a big disappointment because I've never written a Leia novel.
So she must be very excited about the new series that's going to be coming up.
Oh yeah. Well, we've watched the whole of The Mandalorian, which I kind of is that a bit, but no, she thought it was cool. So yeah.
Okay, good. Well, let's see. I wanted to ask you about mentors because we've already talked about her parents, and in the book, her grandparents also play an important role, which my grandparents did for me in my life. But later on, as Janeway goes to the academy and then she moves on, she comes under the wing of Owen Paris, which we've talked about, and another character called Flora Christopher, and then others along the way. And I just wanted to get your thoughts a little bit on mentors and how the people we encounter in our life influence who we are along the way and play roles that maybe even our parents can't play.
Oh, I think particularly play roles that our parents can't play, and even within situations where parenting has been excellent or extremely competent, which it has in this case, mentorship is incredibly important. So grandparents are different again. I think it's that old saw about a village to raise a child. You need these perspectives, and a nuclear family is too enclosed. It's too hermetically sealed. And even introducing grandparents, who are the people that you observe your parents being children against. If you see, they were children
right.
too. They are subject to authority. Yeah, they're irritated in the way that I feel irritated with them. So you observe that, and it makes your parents loom less, I think. And also you get spoiled and all these sorts of things. I didn't have grandparents. They pretty much all died before I was born. But mentors are something very, very different because they are outside of that circle. They're not invested in it. They're invested in perhaps your intellectual growth or your emotional growth, your growth to maturity, your growth towards full adult personhood. And they're not invested in the family. They might be family friends. So, they might go, well, I knew your mother at college, and let me tell you X, Y.
Right.
So again, they're a kind of, or, well, have you thought about this from your father's perspective? Because I know that X matters a great deal to him.
Mm-hmm.
Or they just might not be invested at all. And they might be a kind of, you might be working for someone and go, wow, that's how you deal with an idiot boss, or
right.
That's how you build consensus in this room, or oh crumbs, I really respect them and they've given me something they give me a task to do that I'm a bit nervous about. Who do I go to for advice? Who do I get guidance from in a professional context? And I think these figures are extremely important. It's a big theme of the Tilly book as well, where I think she's really, really struggling to find good mentorship. Yeah, because her mother is so impressive a figure and so not suited to the task of mothering her own child, or this specific child, which happens.
That's an excellent book, by the way. So if any Discovery fans haven't read it and you want it's got a backstory to Tilly.
Yeah, it's a young adult novel. Yeah,
enhanced the show a lot, especially at the time it came out.
Thank you very much. I'm very proud of that book. Actually, it did everything I wanted to be doing to kind of subvert a Star Trek novel. So I was very pleased with it. And some of those things again, I think Janeway, people want her to succeed. They see a sort of strength and integrity. And she's quite good at because she does have admirals coming around and giving her piggybacks and things. I think she's not afraid to reach out to these people, which is I think one of her captains says, "Oh, it's all right for you, in your network," and there's some truth in that. But I don't think she misuses that. She doesn't use it for advantage. She doesn't use it to cover her failings. She uses it to assist her growth. And I suspect would be generous with it, the kind of thing, "Oh, well, I know Admiral X. Let me put you in touch. He's got really good advice to give on this." I imagine Janeway doing that kind of thing all the time. Her network would be your network.
That's the slogan of Space LinkedIn, I think, right?
Is it? Oh, dear.
My network will be your network. So.
There you go. I'm going to get myself sued for this, but in a kind of non-commercialized, non-horrible way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, were there any mentors in your life that you drew upon when you're thinking about how Janeway's career went when you wrote this?
I was almost comically bereft of mentors, which I suspect is one reason I write about them a lot. So I think it's a lot of wish. I wish I'd been surrounded. And also I was probably comically unaware of people offering me mentorship, which is probably my other error in life. So no, I've made life very difficult for myself over the years. That sort of made it matter to me more, I think. So that's why I write about it. And that's why I do it as well. It matters. Yeah.
That sounds like the great basis for a TV comedy. I would like to watch that show where you're just bereft of the fact that people around you are trying to mentor you.
Yeah. Here's some advice. And you're going, no, I deny that reality with wisdom and good guidance. So yes, I'm sure there were many gentle nudges given over the year, and I felt it. It seems to have worked out broadly okay.
Well, let's shift gears a little bit, because another thing that I had to ask you about, because your love for Deep Space Nine and Cardassia is very well known. And there's so much talk in this book about the Cardassians and about Bajor and about the Federation Cardassian War and what led up to that. And it seemed natural to me that you would include this. And I think most fans don't connect Janeway with those events, even though those two series were running concurrently because Voyager was in the Delta Quadrant. And I was curious how much of the inclusion of this storyline of history during the 24th century stems from your love of Deep Space Nine and Cardassia, or is it just that conflict, the Federation Cardassia conflict, was like the defining theme in the lives of up-and-coming officers during that time?
I think it is in the show. I think they do draw connections. So the encounter with the Cardassian soldier, I think, is from the show, and it seemed to be something that would be, she's had this Starfleet career before Voyager, and it's the defining conflict of that period. So this would be where she's seeing action along the Cardassian border, particularly obviously with the Maquis, and the Maquis arise from the Cardassian kind of border skirmish. So all of that's there. It just needed the dots connecting, really. And then it absolutely struck me that, the whole of Deep Space Nine is going to this major conflict that all of her contemporaries would be undergoing. She's simply not there for. The Dominion War would be the kind of decisive moment for many people, the big war of their career, and they're not there for it. I'm reminded of, I think I was thinking of a story of, is it Shackleton's mission to the voyage to the Antarctic, and they get washed up on whichever island it is, and then they have to walk 100 miles in slippers across the ice mountains or something. And when they're kind of rescued, they learn that World War I has broken out and has been underway for some time. And this struck me as the same sort of thing, that if you had missed this war, first of all, many of your friends would be dead, because they'd be captains of ships, your contemporaries, and secondly, you would not have shared this uniquely bonding experience. So I think it would be very odd for Janeway to come back. And as for the Maquis, it's a case of, well, that's just gone. Everything we were doing, they're all dead. That conflict just doesn't exist anymore. Everything we were invested in, that slate has been wiped clean. And that strikes me as a really weird thing to have to come back to, a reset to have to do. This world just doesn't exist anymore. So I could see drama in that and emotional impact. So that's, and also can't help myself, obviously, the Cardassians. So I had to get in this.
Right.
But I'd like to think that I was kind of, textually guided by this in some way.
Well, it makes perfect sense, of course, in universe that this would be influencing and affecting everyone at the time. It struck me, knowing your love for and knowledge of the conflict itself and the Cardassians, that you were the ideal person to write this into the story because of your depth of knowledge and passion for that time period, but particularly the Cardassians themselves. So it worked quite well for me, and it kind of helped create more cohesion between Voyager and what was happening overall in that time period.
Good. And obviously there's TNG touches on the troubles with Cardassians as well. Obviously we see them there for the first time. So I didn't manage to fit Garak in. I think that would have been a stretch. They can meet another time.
You should have thanked Tiny Garak in your acknowledgements at the end of the book.
my constant companion.
Yeah. I'd like to thank Tiny Garak for appearing in many places on my desk as I wrote this novel.
He does pretty much sit there. For listeners who don't know, I have a little plastic Garak figure who, in the before times, used to travel everywhere with me, and he's a regular feature on my Twitter feed. He pops up in all sorts of.
That's right.
I took him to CERN, so he's visited the Large Hadron Collider. He's been all over.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he pops up. So, he goes everywhere.
So Cardassian spies have been at CERN. All right.
CERN, yeah, exactly that. I wouldn't trust him near my expensive equipment. But
That's right. You mentioned there how shocking it would be coming back and finding out that the Maquis and everything that was going on there beforehand is now gone, and that this conflict happened because that situation with the Maquis is ultimately what got Voyager thrown to the Delta Quadrant in the first place, because that's why they were there in the Badlands. And after everything that you went through to get back, and you come back and then you find out that it doesn't exist anymore, would probably make you feel a little bit like, what was it all for, I think.
I think in Janeway's mind, she flicks a switch quite early on, which I think is this is very Janeway, is that she sees them as almost as ambassadors, that they are fulfilling their mission. They're meeting new species, they're exploring space. They are the first contact. We are the Federation. We are Starfleet, and we are the first you will ever encounter. And one day, maybe a wormhole will open, the same as it does with the Gamma Quadrant, and you will have met Starfleet, and you will not think badly of us. So that is always in her mind, I think, and it's typical Janeway to kind of find a positive spin to a very, very hard situation. So in that sense, I think she would feel her mission hadn't been a waste, that it had been entirely congruent with what Starfleet and the Federation are all about. I think they talk about that, don't they, when they leave Neelix behind, that he's their he's a sort of ambassador for them. So I was kind of guided by that, that he was their first friend, and they hope they've left many friends behind. Hope so, anyway.
It's an excellent point, and it makes you think what might have happened had a Starfleet vessel been thrown into the Gamma Quadrant years before the Dominion conflict, and worlds in the Delta Quadrant had an opportunity to learn about Starfleet prior to this. I don't know if it would have made much of a difference because the changelings just don't like solids, so maybe that would have still played out the same. But at the same time, maybe there would have been allies in the Delta Quadrant. Maybe there would have been some influence that might have changed the nature of the
changelings have been persecuted, haven't they? That's already been set up, I think, before the wormhole opens. And also, to give the founders their due, Garrick, Tane, and the Tal Shiar tried to wipe them out. So,
it's true.
they've got quite well grounded fears of Alpha Quadrant powers, I think.
Yeah, and encounters with one Federation ship probably wouldn't undo that ill will that was established.
No. Yeah. So they really messed that up. But I really liked this idea, and it's very Starfleet as well, isn't it? It's like, we are here now, a Federation has arrived, be aware of us and this kind of thing. And we have that other ship out there. These are my favourite episodes, actually, about the Equinox.
Oh, yeah, right.
Really, really good two-parter. So what happens when it breaks down? So,
One more question I had about Janeway and just kind of how she thinks about things is, you mentioned near the end the episode Workforce, and Janeway talks about her time at the Quarren Industrial Complex. And that's an episode I've always found interesting because it raises questions about Janeway's desires. She's so duty-driven to get everybody home. But in those softer moments when we see her, we know that she is a more complex character. And that episode always made me think about her desires versus her sense of duty to the choice that she made that stranded the crew in the Delta Quadrant. What are your thoughts on her statement when she says, there's the final line, and she says that I was happy there?
It's really sad, isn't it? Yeah. Because I think it speaks of her loss of the marriage to Mark, that was she's just on the cusp of a sort of proving that you can have it all. And I think although this seems like an odd theme, well, it's not an odd theme now, actually. This was very, very, very important in the 90s. So when Voyager is being made, is it possible to combine career and marriage for women?
Right.
So this was, and I think it runs through Voyager in many ways, because even though it's a show set in the future, it's written as a show grounded in a specific context and specific concerns. And you always have to bear that in mind. So the presence of this woman captain, I think, always in the background, we're having these questions being asked, and she is offered this sort of she's offered a home life, isn't she? She's offered a partner and a way of being, and then of course, as she comes back to full awareness, she's always ever going to go back to Voyager. They're offered these moments several times, aren't they? So I think they're invited to stay on a. Isn't that in the Amelia Earhart episode as well? There's a chance for them to stay. You can just stop now and remain with this human colony. So there are various moments where they're given a chance to stop and settle and just be in the world. But they turn it down. They want to go home. Obviously, they wouldn't have a show for one thing. But it does speak to something. But that's a really sad line, isn't it? And I think she does. And I play this in the book, I hope. That's a big loss to her, that marriage with Mark. She's found a way. She's found a partner who said, let's set this up so that you can be Kathryn Janeway, but you can be Kathryn Janeway with me. And that's huge for her. And it's a real loss. And then she spends the 7 years kind of going, well, because of this setup, I don't enter into a relationship with someone because it will be, I just have to be the captain. That's what the job is in this situation. and I can't afford to be distracted, or I can't afford to break the stasis in some way, complicate things even further in some way. And I think that's really tough. That would be a big ask of anyone. And I think they play it through a female character so that it's got extra kind of nuance. But I think it's quite well done. And I hope at the end of this book, she does feel like she's got everything, because she deserves it. I think.
Yeah. Well, losing that with Mark, as you say, would be very difficult, because she had the earlier relationship, which you describe in the book, where the person basically wanted her to put her career on hold, which is, the kind of the classic setup. And she passed on that. And then she found someone who was wanted to work with her so that she could be all that she wanted to be. And then she loses that, which is tough. And you talk about the opportunities that they have to stay behind from time to time. And what I find interesting in the show is that Chakotay's more willing to take that opportunity. I think he's a bit more practical, like, it's going to be very hard for us to get back, so maybe we should take an opportunity and just start a new life here. And she's determined, no, we're going to get everyone home. And so she's very strong in that sense, but you can feel at times the pressure that she's under to make that happen. And in Workforce, it takes that moment where she doesn't remember who she is, and then that comes out from her. And then you can kind of feel what's maybe underneath all the time.
I think Kate Mulgrew plays it beautifully in those episodes as well, because the Janeway that we see there is quite timid and risk averse. There's something not Janeway about her. And then when full memory is sort of restored and Kathryn is back, that's it, right? Straight out. There's no question about what needs to be done. I'm myself again. So it's very, very nicely performed as well. There's something not quite Janeway about her, without that mission and that certainty.
Well, actually, I have two more points I wanted to ask you about. One of them is not so much related to the story. So the one that is near the end of the book, we connect back to the beginning where we're talking about children again. Janeway talks about the fact that they ended up having quite a few children on the ship. And as fans, I think many of us have often felt and have said that perhaps Voyager as a show missed an opportunity by not being more of a generational ship. They actually were able to get back, because the show could have gone in a different way and shown what it's like to have a long journey. But when you think about it, there were quite a number of children on the ship, either those born there like Naomi or those they picked up like Icheb and the Borg children. And also Janeway is very much a mother figure to Seven. And I guess my thought here in seeing how they connect is, as you're writing this and you're thinking about Janeway and you've written her life from childhood and her experiences to where she's now in the position that her parents, she doesn't have children of her own biologically, but she's in that position that her parents were in at the beginning of the book. So tying those all together, what are your thoughts on that, first of all? And why do you think that it was important to Janeway to nurture people, as we did see her do throughout the show?
The reasons why they don't really do it in the show, of course, obvious, is that, it's a show that they know it's a 7 series and it's going to be syndicated. Although Deep Space Nine manages to do it, but then it's sort of the hidden, Voyager's the flagship, isn't it? I think, or it's the very,
at the
it's
time,
the one
it was.
Yeah, it's the one that people are watching, isn't it? Whereas I think it's Deep Space Nine now that people are really responding to. Why would she mentor? I think because she's had that positive experience of her own. And I think she's driven by duty. She's driven not just by duty in a kind of dry way, but in a sense of duty is something to motivate and enlarge her life. She feels, firstly, part of her own family. She feels very much part of the family of Starfleet. She's been given good examples of how she can benefit of how life can be benefited by good guidance or good involvement. I think 7 is a mixed success. I think B'Elanna probably is her greater triumph.
Yeah.
Although I think 7 has to find her own way in many ways, and it's an interesting relationship. It's sort of partly daughterly and partly superior officer, and but they play it in several different ways, and partly mentor and partly trauma therapist. Yeah, so they have to play it in many different ways of person who guides. Whereas with B'Elanna, I think it's more straightforwardly. You've seen partly her boss and partly a sort of positive older female role model. So it just seemed to me something that Janeway would do naturally. She would take care of the people around her, partly because that leads to a functioning ship. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So there's a kind of pragmatic goal to it, but there are ways to motivate, and there are ways to, you can motivate through fear. And this is, we see Equinox there. And one of the stories I found really touching that I really wanted to pick up was on the crew members that came from Equinox, particularly the quite junior ones. And that seemed to me something that she would follow through, that she would keep an eye on them and make sure they were okay, because to some extent, perhaps she could see how she might have made those decisions, and it wouldn't have been Harry Kim's fault. Yeah. He would have, what would Harry have done with his superiors giving him different orders? And I think the McKee as well, I think we have that in the end of that. Isn't this the thing that she threatens to go postal over at the end of the book, that, there's a couple of admirals going, well, they should all go to prison. And she's like, you make a move on them, matey. I'm going to be all over the networks bad mouthing you. They've served and served well. So I think she would protect her own and reward good service. So I think she's bringing out the best in people. That's good leadership.
Well, the other thing I wanted to ask you about that's not really related to the story so much, it's just something that stood out to me in light of recent Star Trek, is you mentioned Mars a lot in this book. And Mars has always been around in Star Trek as Utopia Planitia, where they build ships and all from the beginning. But we have a number of characters here who either live on Mars or grew up there, they're serving there. And I was just curious if there's any connection to the fact that Mars sort of came to the forefront in Star Trek Picard and kind of highlighting the role of the Red Planet in Starfleet life during the 24th century.
I think this is as straightforward so it's really interesting. I didn't realize I'd done it so much. I'd literally just finished writing the Picard book when I started this one. So okay. It's probably as straightforward as that. That it was looming quite large in my imagination. I've written about Mars in other contexts as well. So I've written a Doctor Who story about Mars, and I've written a kind of retelling of the Spartacus story on a kind of science fictional Mars. That's the original novella. So I think it's as simple as that. That I literally sent off the draft for the Picard book, and then went, oh, what now? Oh, Janeway. It was quite a very different experience. One's very melancholy, and both books of two people reflecting back on their life, but very, very different in tone, I think. So I think it could be as simple as that Mars had been looming quite high in my imagination.
I see. Well, it's a good connection for me this week, actually, because one piece I've been working on for my magazine is about NASA's Artemis program, which will hopefully ultimately put men and women on Mars. Yeah. And so it's a great progression that, we're getting close to taking maybe a first step there, and it will grow into Starfleet. Well, I have a bonus question for you, Una. I don't know if you can answer this one, but given that you're a Niner, and given that you've written the autobiography of Kathryn Janeway, can we expect to see the autobiography of Benjamin Sisko coming from you anytime in the future?
I honestly don't know. It all depends. Publishing is a tough old game. Certainly, it seems a very natural project to come next. That Deep Space Nine really should get its moment in the sun. I'd love to do Kira, actually. That I think would be... will be right up my street. So who knows? I could see it would be a natural book to do next. Hopefully this one has done well and people have liked it. We've obviously not been able to There's going to be loads of promo around it, and it's the anniversary year. We're going to do conventions and stuff. Obviously, not be able to do any of that, but I hope people have read it anyway. I think there's going to be if conventions are running next year. I know the big destination Star Trek convention is planning to run next November, and they're going to treat it like the Voyager anniversary year. It's like, okay, we kind of had that year off, so we'll celebrate 26 years instead. So, but fingers crossed, Cisco book would be really interesting, wouldn't it? Yeah. So, but we'll see.
So the conventions are going to be doing what we're doing here in Tokyo, which is we're calling, if we have the Olympics next year, we're still calling it Tokyo 2020.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's fantastic, actually. Yeah. Do you think they'll have
still see? I'm a bit skeptical if it will actually happen. If it does, I think it'll be scaled down. But all around the city now, all over, you see posters, all the trains. We still have Tokyo 2020 everywhere. Which it makes sense from a marketing perspective, so you don't have to reprint everything, and it's a branding exercise. But well, I hope you do get to write those, because I think, again, you would be the perfect person to write an autobiography of Sisko and Kira and Garak.
Well, that's already been done, of course. That's
yeah.
We have Andy Robinson's book, so that's
right.
Yeah, that's happened.
Right.
But I'd love to write my own version of events.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what I'm thinking of, because you've written so much about Garak over the years, and also you have a little advisor right there on your desk. I mean, who knows Garak better than Tiny Garak himself?
I'm sure he's never willingly told me the truth.
Exactly. Okay, well, usually there's a lot of convention stuff coming up that we can talk about here at the end, and not so much of that, but I know you're always busy with things. So tell people what you have on the horizon, and also where they can find you if they want to follow what you have going on.
Well, I would definitely follow me on Twitter, which is at Una McCormack. And if people aren't sick of the sound of my voice, they can have a look at my website. And I've done lots of podcasts. I think we've all been doing that during the past year. Just done one on Captain Marvel, which people might enjoy, which I absolutely adore. So it's half an hour of me just being frenetically excited about a fantastic film. It's had a lot of fun with that. I have a Doctor Who novel that's literally just come out sort of in the last week or so, which is called All Flesh is Grass. And it's part of a big project, Time Lord Victorious project, which is all sorts of multimedia stuff going on, I think, during this year of lockdown and the show not being on air. There've been kind of audio dramas and comic strips and novels and all sorts of business going on. And I've got a novel out in that, which has, it's got 3 doctors in it. It's got David Tennant's Doctor and Christopher Eccleston's and Paul McGann's. So it's quite a big sort of event. So people might enjoy that. I have got projects underway, but they've not been announced, so I can't. But there'll be some exciting stuff, I hope, in the new year. Some really good fun stuff to tell people. So yeah, I just can't tell you now.
Excellent. Well, it's good to hear that there's more stuff coming up. Well, Una, thank you for getting together with me early in the morning there for you, evening here for me, to talk about the autobiography of Kathryn Janeway. And I hope that you have great holidays over there under the circumstances. And look forward to having you here on Literary Treks again.
Always a pleasure. Always wonderful questions. So thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Well, Matthew, I'm really sad that you weren't with Una and me for that discussion, because I know you would have loved it, but Una sends you her best, and I hope you enjoy listening back to what she had to say about family and mentors and childhood, and it was a great, for me as a parent, a great kind of family discussion.
Yeah, I'm really excited. It is fun to be able to listen to the show as a fan, and be able to get to hear what, the authors have to say. So I'm really looking forward to it. And Una is always fantastic. And so I have no doubt it's going to be a fantastic show. But, yeah, we're really excited. As you know, we're kind of mentioning in the news for what we've got coming up, Chris. And, one of the things that I know both you and I have talked about behind the scenes is, we wanted to thank our associate producers for being so kind and generous to us through Patreon, because it's really meant a lot to us, the people that have stuck with us over the years and help keep the network coming to you each and every week. And we really want to say a huge thank you to Greg Rosier and Casey Petite. Just thank you so much, guys. We do truly appreciate the fact that you have been sticking with us. And as we head into 2021, we would like to ask you, just as they have, to take a look at patreon.com/TrekFM and help support the network, because, Chris, this is a very expensive thing to put on Trek FM, and we could definitely, especially as we move into 2021, we could definitely use as much help as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have some new ideas for our perks, of course, getting the roundtables going again, as well as some interactive elements with trivia, things like that. Some things I've encountered recently that look like a lot of fun, and try to see 2021, the year is going to be a bridge for everyone, a sort of transition from this chaotic year of coronavirus that we've had in 2020 into what we call the new normal. But I would like to transition some things there too, get a little bit of interaction going, and try some new things on the Star Trek front. And not just Star Trek, but beyond, of course, because we have the 602 Club there with you, Matthew.
Absolutely, and we've got some things cooking behind the scenes. We actually do. It's in the works, folks, but there's going to be a new short-run series show that's going to be coming out over under the 602 Club banner, which we're really excited to be able to announce soon to you guys. So get on the edge of your seats, folks, because it's going to be a fun ride.
Well, Matthew, when you're not working on that upcoming short-run show and you're not trying to figure out just what Seven's Reckoning might be, where can people find you?
You can find me pretty much any social media platform that I'm on. I'm Matt Rushing02, so just check me out there. Of course, here on the network doing the 602 Club, which you can also follow on Twitter at the 602 Club. And we're talking about all things geeky. And as we mentioned, we're going to be growing that side of the network as well. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Please, check us out. We have a great time over there. I can't believe, Chris, I think that this year the 602 Club turned 5 or 6. I don't know.
I think it's older than that.
Maybe.
Probably.
Yeah, it could be. That's how long it's been, and I can't remember. But so really excited to be doing that. Of course, you can also find me over on the Nerd Party Network doing Aggressive Negotiations with John Mills, which is a Star Wars podcast, as well as Owl Post with Drea Kaufman, which is a Harry Potter podcast where we talk about the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. But Chris, when people are looking to catch up with you online and see what you've got going on, where can they find you?
Well, it's interesting that you bring up how old the 602 Club is, because speaking of longevity, this past week, December 14th, I believe it was, actually marked 10 years for me podcasting, and 10 years since the first podcast episode aired on Trek FM. So we're fully into a decade now. That's hard to believe. And
it's crazy.
Yeah, it's really crazy and hard to believe. And, the last few years have kept me off mic most of the time, but things are starting to change. I will still be doing the magazine in 2021, but under a different arrangement. So I'm hoping that's going to free some time up for me so I can get back on mic. I have quite a few ideas, both in the Star Trek realm and elsewhere. But if you'd like to hear my thoughts on things that have been going on, there's, of course, the Ready Room, which I do with Larry Nemechek. We do that roughly once a month this year. We're a little bit delayed in our next episode, but that'll be coming soon. There's also The Edge, where I'm covering Season 3. I'm very far behind on that, but I will be releasing episodes for each episode of the third season of Discovery. And then, of course, we do The Orb together, Matthew, where we talk Deep Space Nine. We'll have some new episodes of that coming out as well in the new year. And I just have some other ideas for other things. So I'm hoping very much to get back on mic. And if you'd like to chat with me about Star Trek or anything, you can find me in social media. My username on Twitter is CBryanJones. That's the letter C and Bryan with a Y. That's my username pretty much everywhere, but Twitter's where I'm most active. I'm not a big Facebook user. I do pop into the Babel conference, of course. But if you want to find me anywhere on social media, Instagram or wherever, that is my username, CBryanJones. And that's pretty much what I have going on.
Well, we do want to say thank you to everyone for joining us. And until next time, live long and read on.
What do you call that, light reading? To each his own, number one.